Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to experience the Gut Check Project, talking science, health, and innovation that you can actually use. But this isn't just another health show. We're here to have fun and make your time enjoyable. Well, while you are enjoying yourself, know that even though the GCP covers some health topics with healthcare pros, we are not your doctors. So use our show to entertain your mind and not for medical advice. And now, here are your hosts of the Gut Check Project, Dr. Ken Brown and Eric Rieger.
Hello, Gut Check Project fans and KBMD Health family. I'm Eric Rieger, your host, joined by this awesome guy, Dr. Kenneth Brown. Ken, what's up, man?
What's going on? Today's episode 84. It'll be a little quicker one, but something came out and we got to start addressing a couple really interesting science and a couple different news articles that I think we can't wait on. We just got to get out there.
We're going to hit the FDA. We got a little story about Ryan Reynolds and a little bit of update from Mark Pimentel, right?
Yeah, we were privy to an accepted article on Sibo. So if you know anybody that has Sibo, you're going to want to hear this. That is not in publication yet. So this is the first you will hear about it.
So if we had a wheel, we could spin it, and then you could say that you want it to land on something. Which article would you like for it to start with?
I want to start with... Oh, it says that. Eric, what have you been up to?
Oh, well, what have I been up to? Today, I'm going to leave this afternoon to go hang out with the boys. And not only am I going to see my boys, there's a good chance I'm going to see your son tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
In Lubbock. Of course, my kids go to Tech. Your son is about to attend UT, but he's playing a pro tournament on the Tech campus. And if he wins today, he'll be there tomorrow, and I get to check in on Lucas.
He will be in the finals, yes. So that's what's going on with us. Lucas is in Lubbock playing his first technically pro tournament. It's a futures tournament, and him and his doubles partner, Aiden Kim, which is awesome because it's crazy to sit there and think that him and Aiden won 12s nationals and 14s nationals, and they've won multiple national tournaments together when they were real little, and now they're playing together in Lucas's first pro tournament, so he's got some ATP pro points, so super excited about that, and it happens to be in a weekend. You're going to be there, and UT is going to go play Texas Tech in football this weekend.
I forget that they even have a team. I knew Tech had a team. I didn't know that Texas had anything. But, the boys and I are going to cook out. We got a new grill at Gage's house. He and his fiance have got a spread they're going to put together. And Mac is bringing some friends over. So between the game, hanging out tonight, and then seeing me off on Sunday, I think we've got a full weekend planned, and then hopefully checking in on Lucas.
That's awesome. Yeah, totally. So, my weekend is just going to be riveted watching Texas play Texas Tech in football and watching Lucas play a little tennis. So.
Nice. Good.
Awesome. One of the stories that I wanted to bring up, just because it shows how important it is, and it seems like all my patients are bringing this up, and it's really funny. So, I turned into, on Hulu, it's like a little guilty pleasure I have. There is a show called Wrexham, Wrexham.
Okay.
It's really kind of interesting. I guess it's kind of like a documentary, but they're going forward, putting it together because they're just following to see what happens. Rob McElhenney of Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Awesome for even making that show.
Yes. And Ryan Reynolds became social media friends, and they actually developed that friendship. And somehow one of the writers on Rob McElhenney's staff is a huge soccer fan, football over there. And they got to talking about it, and then whenever they had a chance, they were watching it, and somehow it came up that he convinced Ryan Reynolds, which is really funny because he's like, I knew that I wanted to purchase one of these struggling teams, but I have TV money. I don't have movie money, superhero money, gin money, Mint Mobile money. And he's like, golly, how many companies does this guy own? So Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds purchased a football club in Wales called Wrexham. And it's really cool because it reminds McElhenney of the Philadelphia Eagles, where it's just kind of a gritty town and all this other stuff. So anyways, I'm kind of following that. And then this news story pops up, and Keith actually put it on my Facebook page, the link to it. Basically, Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds turned 45. They made a bet, and the loser had to have their colonoscopy filmed.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Not have a colonoscopy, but have it filmed.
Have it filmed.
Okay.
Both guys got a colonoscopy because they turned 45.
Nice.
So basically, Ryan Reynolds filmed his first colonoscopy. It's on YouTube, and I guess the campaign is called Lead from Behind. He went to New York and figures that he could, went to New York and got his colonoscopy. According to when he was being interviewed, I thought this was pretty funny. Reynolds feigns a lack of recollection of the terms of the wager that led to the video, and McElhenney then explains the wager and reminds him he did all that while speaking Welsh. That is because they had a bet that he couldn't learn Welsh. So he responded in Welsh that he could not remember about the terms of the bet. So anyways, he had it done. He ended up having a colonoscopy, and it was great because this is exactly what I tell my patients. One-stop shop, you get that polyp removed, and it's a potentially life-saving event. And the doctor said, this was potentially life-saving for you. I'm not kidding. I'm not being overly dramatic, the doctor told Reynolds. So it is like that. So this is exactly why we do this. Remember, age 45 now is the screening time. This is the only screening examination that is one-stop shop. If they find a precancerous lesion called a polyp, we can take it out. Unlike other methods that may or may not even be accurate, that just say either you have cancer or you don't. And what I'm referring to is Cologuard, which I'm very biased against based on the data, but if it gets you to get your colonoscopy, then that's okay. So I just love that some of these really popular stars are, putting their butt forward and saying, I'm 45, I'm going to go do it. And so right on to those guys. And it's a really likable show, and I'm kind of into it. So I'm kind of curious to see if they can turn this team around. So,
well, and that's not anything that we take lightly either. I got my first colonoscopy last year while still 45, and it's something that we've encouraged our family members to do. And then, of course, that doesn't leave out those who happen to have other family members who've had serious complications with GI cancers before. You may need to talk with a gastroenterologist and find out maybe you should even get screened earlier than 45. But now 45 is the old 50. 45 is the new 50.
Is the new 50, correct.
The old number was 50, but unfortunately, the incidence of cancer and precancerous polyps showing up earlier it's just a fact of life.
Yeah, and so I've had 3 colonoscopies done. One of them I did exactly what Rob did, but I stayed awake for mine, and I filmed it. You can go to YouTube and see that on Kenneth Brown MD. That's what it's like to get a colonoscopy. If you have any trepidation about doing it, you can watch me do it and see how easy it is and how important it is, and it is life-saving. So once again, super important to get that done. What article do you have that you wanted to talk about?
So let's read off the top here. I did mention that one of the subjects that we have was going to be about the FDA. Very good, short, but really thorough synopsis by Michael White of University of Connecticut School of Pharmacy. The title is, Why is the FDA funded in part by the companies that it regulates? And this is an excellent question.
It's a great title. No shit. Why?
Yeah. Well, it obviously was a process. It's not how the FDA started. So when the FDA, let's just do a little background. I'm going to look down here at the notes here to talk about it. But effectively, the FDA has moved entirely, as it began, as a taxpayer-funded entity to one that's increasingly funded by user fees. And user fees are generated by those who submit their products, their devices, and their drugs to the FDA to simply be approved. That becomes problematic, and we'll get into that here in just a moment. So close to 45% of today's budget comes from those user fees. Like I said, when it very first started, the FDA and its foundation, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act of 1938, was 100% taxpayer funded. Its only purpose was altruistic for the American taxpayer. Essentially, their big breakthrough on why they were so important occurred in the 50s. Thalidomide was being used for morning sickness for pregnant women in several different countries. I think it was over 46 countries were allowing the use of thalidomide throughout the world for pregnant women to use so that they could avert morning sickness. The FDA back then felt like that there weren't enough safety data-driven studies to show that it was simply safe for women to consume. Wouldn't you know it, that not long after that and leading into the early 60s, lots of birth defects. And the FDA,
thalidomide babies. Yeah, it's horrible.
And the FDA never approved thalidomide for its use here. So much so, it was noticed around the world. The FDA was heralded for having not given that approval. And then President Kennedy at the time basically lauded the FDA for saying, man, this is great. You saved all of these unborn children from from birth defects. That is basically how the FDA functioned all the way until 1992. So why did things change?
Yeah, that's not that long ago. What's going on?
So what could have happened in the 80s, do you think? What was probably the biggest pressing issue that could have pushed the FDA over the edge, where maybe they felt overwhelmed and should change their price model?
It had to do something with the pharmaceutical industry.
Definitely. They were in search of a cure for AIDS.
That's right.
And of course, draw a whole bunch of lines here, but the guy at the helm at the time was Fauci.
That's right.
And so as AIDS patients and AIDS sufferers beginning in 1981, when it hit the scene, the research and how we were going to treat AIDS, just basically, we were overwhelmed. They could not meet the demand for research into HIV. How do you prevent HIV from turning into AIDS? And then simply, how do you help AIDS patients?
Is this where the Dallas Buyers Club movie with Matthew McConaughey starts playing into this? Did they address that at all in that movie?
That's a really good movie, and I've seen it a couple of times. I don't know that they talked specifically about that. I do know that pharmaceuticals were out of reach, though, and they certainly were incredibly expensive. So I would imagine that there has to be some kind of play in there between getting their hands on, back then it was ever so popular to combine AZT with whatever, a bunch of different combos. But I don't know the direct relationship between that. Show seemed to be a lot more about cost and access. And it seems like the FDA's purpose, at least for changing their model, was more about the research and availability of new deliverables or, substances to use. So effectively in 1992, from increasing pressure, and granted, most of that pressure was ginned up by those who were involved in research, saying, we can't do, we can't meet, we can't form enough, we can't produce enough. And George W. Bush was pressured into signing the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. So essentially, what this did in '92 is that this made companies that were going to submit a new drug, a new medical device, a new anything, new therapy that would require FDA approval, to pay a fee. Now, on the surface, that doesn't seem so bad. The issue is that the FDA can now and could then issue waivers of those fees.
Oh.
And so now it becomes a political game. You could feel like, okay, well, if they're going to produce something that they're ultimately going to make money from, then of course, why not pay into part of the research and the investigation around this particular device or this drug? But the issue is that companies who are in favor oftentimes don't have that roadblock, and maybe a company that could have a drug that might kind of edge somebody out, they would have to pay more fees, allowing those to not pay any fees. So it immediately swung into a favorable system for those who were on the inside, and not so favorable for those who were on the outside.
Oh, wow. So it turned the FDA, which started as an altruistic thing because of the thalidomide babies, then turns now, just literally overnight, becomes a political scramble.
100%. And so of the FDA's total $5.9 billion budget, 45% comes from user fees, but 65% of the funding for human drug regulatory activities are derived from user fees. Those user fee programs must be reauthorized every 5 years by Congress. And that agreement remained into effect until September of 2022, this month. This is why a lot of this is becoming...
So repeat that last part again. Every 5 years, the Congress does what?
They have to reapprove the funding, which is broken down. So over time, other user fees for generic over-the-counter, biosimilar, which means they can be grandfathered in, animal and animal generic drugs, as well as those for medical devices, was created. So this is basically the avenue. Why is it that we have to pay this fee? Well, it's obvious. You need to pay the fee because these are the things that the FDA approves. And if 45% comes from user fees, well, then that means that 55% comes from the taxpayer. But 65% of the funding for human drug regulatory activities are derived from those user fees which are paid in. So these user fee programs must be reauthorized every 5 years by Congress, and the current one expires this month. And there's a big revisit on should we keep depending upon user fees as the main or as such an important pillar for funding the FDA. Those within the FDA and they have a job and want job security are going to say, well, absolutely, we should grow that because there's only 2 revenue streams here, right? User fees and taxes. And Congress has to approve those which fall outside of taxes. And guess what else Congress has to approve? Taxes.
Oh, geez.
So it becomes a conundrum.
Well, then, like thinking about this, and so immediately when we have been in this space, when we were looking at doing some product development and everything, if you're going to do an NDI, a new dietary ingredient, or an IND, investigational new drug, the fees absolutely prohibit anything but a major corporation from actually playing.
Not only that, and not included in this article, but who gets most of the waivers? It's those who submit the most. I mean, they get breaks because they've submitted something else. You almost get like credit for other things that you paid into.
It's like, okay, so we did this, we paid that, now it's a good old boy network at this point.
Yeah, sure. And then when I really emphasized biosimilar.
Mm-hmm.
Biosimilar means we've just had a particular vaccine put in. This one isn't that much different. Surely it could be approved also. That same thing happens in medical devices. If you haven't seen The Bleeding Edge on Netflix,
that's
worth a watch. And you can see the danger of grandfathering in devices when they haven't simply been checked for either different formulations, content of what the metals are that are in hip replacements, mesh. There's a bunch of different problems with things just being grandfathered in and being assumed a safety profile when, in fact, it doesn't exist. But let's look at something real quick before we finish this topic, and that is have the user fees worked? And I love this summation that Michael White put together, but the performance measures are something that the FDA says that they're going to do. So essentially, they're going to give KPI or key performance metrics for something to perform by, and that they are the ones who keep up with that performance, and then they can grade how well did it work. Well, because of the additional funding generated by user fees and performance measures that the FDA has to meet, the FDA is quicker and more willing to discuss what it wants to see in the application with its manufacturers. You're almost taking down the barrier of entry because you're kind of walking people through the process a little bit. It would be really nice if you added this in here. It might be great if you did this over here, because now you're generating more work for your department. It also offers clearer guidance for manufacturers. So in 1987, for instance, this could be seen as good and bad. It took 29 months from the time a new drug application was submitted for the FDA to decide whether to approve that medication in the U.S. In 2014, it took 13 months, and by 2018, it was down to 10 months. Like I said, could be good, could be bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are giving a full review, but it also means that you might be bringing something to market which is desperately needed for someone who is suffering. So there's good and there's bad. But changes in more recent years have also increased the number of standard new drug applications that were approved the first time around. 38% were approved the first time around in 2005. 61% first-time application drugs approved in 2018. Think about that.
Whoa.
What level of improvement in drug manufacture outside of AI would we have been able to apply, not even in performance? I'm talking strictly in safety measures. You can't manufacture time. It doesn't matter how well you design something. You simply cannot manufacture time.
Yeah, that is a shocking number right there, because it just shows that it's really truly a pay-to-play type thing.
Well, you would almost think, well, maybe that percentage went up because the number of drugs submitted went down, so they're just getting better at submitting drugs, right? It's actually the opposite. The number of drugs submitted between the early 2000 and 2018 is almost threefold.
What?
Yeah. So think of that.
Well, what I'm shocked about that is knowing that the outrageous price that you have to pay to do this, threefold more companies, threefold more.
What if you're not paying that price? What if you're getting that waiver?
Oh, geez.
Yeah. I mean, it's still one department. So, and I wish I had the exact number. I know the article I read outside of this one said that it was almost threefold. So that could be a range. That could be 2.6. I don't know that exact number. I wish I had it available, but almost 3 times the number. And you've gone from a percentage of approval from, 38% to 61%. That doesn't jive. Not in 18 years.
No, considering why it was started, that we made this ginormous mistake with thalidomide, and now there's the potential for these other things to come through, which we won't know the real ramifications for years later. Don't even get me started on, the whole Vioxx thing, where they kind of saw that there was heart attacks going on, but they realized they could make a ginormous profit until they were pulled off. They're like, well, we're gonna pay back our investors in this. We're gonna get our stockholders the money that they have there. If you haven't seen it yet, go definitely check out Dope Sick, because that really explains a whole lot of how the FDA can be manipulated by companies supplying data. And this doesn't even mean that the FDA even knows that there's something going on. They have to evaluate if something is safe by the data that's being given by the company. It isn't like, here's our raw data, you go ahead and take a look at it. They're like, everything else is closed. You make your decision based on this data that we interpreted through our data, and it's safe. Just trust us. It's safe. It's good.
Well, there's not only that, it's safe, it's trust us, it's good. It's a hard one to swallow whenever you can actually, to me, it's a hard one to swallow whenever you can actually break down how does the FDA handle this large volume. I would probably grant that most people were unfamiliar with the phrase emergency use authorization until COVID-19.
Right.
And that's unveiled all kinds of different discrepancies and problems on the way that things have necessarily been approved. Work or not work, I'm actually far less concerned about that. I'm just simply talking about safety profile. And so from that perspective, you would think, well, what is the FDA doing as a retrospective for a mechanism around safety? You have to ask yourself, are you as a consumer actually seeing this? But the FDA's biggest and most fierce form of retroactively addressing something that's been approved without removing it from the market is simply to issue a black box warning. That sounds important, and it is, but it's really only important to those who happen to see it, your prescriber and your pharmacist, and you as a consumer. For the most part, you're simply having to trust the direction. Let's face it, the physician and the pharmacist are being told, well, it's still safe enough for us to keep on the shelf. It's still safe enough for us to say it's okay for you to recommend it to your patients. These are issues. And then knowing that 21% of medications in the early go of black box warnings has now increased to 27% lets you know that the trend for previously approved but now considered dangerous products which have been allowed to remain on the shelf has only increased in a significant manner by 6% when we now agree that well over 2 times the number of drugs have been approved. That's a lot of drugs still available that now say, it's still here.
Yeah.
Might not be so good for you. Yeah. Anyway, I think that this presents a great case that Michael White wrote about on why the FDA probably has a glaring hole here on its altruistic approach to protecting the American public from dangerous drugs and med devices.
I wanted to bring this up because I've actually looked up a text from a friend who is doing research with a startup company. And they said that we're presenting some COVID-19 phase 3 data. They showed a life-saving effect in invasive mechanical ventilated patients compared to placebo. And they're applying for an emergency use authorization. And I was like, wow, how many people in each arm? And he's like, it doesn't work that way in EUA. It's just a couple people. Like, you just have to show.
That's complete bullshit. Because I'm sorry, but what they've demonstrated now is that EUA is now an accepted pathway. EUA shouldn't be, it's like, okay, how to best put this? You're driving down the highway and there's a traffic jam and you wait for it to clear, and then you know that you need to get to this exit that's coming up here. But unfortunately, you're delayed a little bit, but you're safely going to make it to the exit as the traffic kind of lets up and you're able to get there. Eventually, if there happens to be some grass off to the side and a feeder road, somebody says, oh, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to veer off here and hop down to the feeder road. And next thing you know, one or two more people follow them. And then after that, suddenly it becomes a dirt path because it's easier to just simply take the non-road over to the feeder road while you're now congesting traffic where it wasn't designed to go, and you have accidents. And that's why you have police who now have to monitor the area because people are exiting too early because they're getting around traffic jams. That's an EUA.
That is an EUA. That is a great analogy. And I wonder how many EUAs are being done. I wonder how many, like, this is a startup, biotech, that seems like that's the business model. We're going to see if this works in the sickest of the sick, and if it does, and what is the placebo? You're not really doing that. You're like, that's standard of care. If you sign this consent, let's see what happens. And it may be a godsend. Who knows? It may be amazing.
That is what you and I have never debated. It's never been about that. But the really, really important thing that the FDA is there to do for us as prescribers, for pharmacists, for you as consumers, is to make certain that no matter what is being offered, that it's not going to make you worse or give you a new problem.
Yeah.
That's what's being ignored. Safety is being sacrificed, in my opinion. But that's the synopsis on that.
Well, it's crazy because if you get an emergency use authorization and a few hundred people were even looked at, let's just say, in this case, I want to say that EUA, you can get EUA granted. Well, I know for a fact because we were on with an FDA attorney. I don't know if you were on that call, but we were, no. I forgot, here local in Houston. I forgot her name. Shit. Sorry. But anyways, she was working with a client who was applying for EUA because they helped one person.
That doesn't make sense.
I know. It's weird, right? But she said, yeah, that's all you need. You need to show efficacy in one person in an otherwise life-threatening situation. Makes sense if there's nothing available and you're like, look, I saved this one person. I need to be able to give other people this product. That kind of makes sense. So the EUA should be in the most extreme of extreme. But, we're coming at the tail end of this pandemic. Do we really need EUAs being offered at this point? I don't know.
Side note, on 60 Minutes, so today is a Friday. So
Friday.
Sunday of this week, and then this episode will probably be out a week and a half after this. But President Biden mentioned that the pandemic is over. It's been recorded that he said in an interview with that guy's name. Oh, Scott Pelley. Red Raider. Anyway, so throw that in there. But Scott Pelley asked Biden, and Biden said that the pandemic is over. And the Health and Human Services Secretary has challenged that, but can't outright say that the president is incorrect. And it begins to give you a glimpse, the crack, we're not on the same page there because your bureaucrats should not have a vested interest in the corporate performance of something of this nature that's supposed to help solve a health problem. And if the health problem is coming under control, then that should work. In fact, just before I came in here, I was sent a clip by another doctor. Kim, I was working with, and it was, who's the CDC? Walensky. What's her name? Walensky, CDC director. Anyway, she was being asked if the pandemic is over, according to President Biden, Dr. Biden, according to President Biden, then when will she turn her sights on solving the issue of the fentanyl crisis, which I thought was an interesting thing because today, roughly 400 people perish with an associated infection of COVID-19. 400 nationwide. He was able to highlight that, I don't know what the total number is, but he said multiples of people of that number are dying from fentanyl every day.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't that take precedence if saving American lives is what their issue is?
That's a good point.
And it was not met. It was met with lots of resistance. Not to get political. In fact, don't get me wrong. This was President Bush who signed this act, who put it in. So I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. We are just simply highlighting maybe bureaucrats shouldn't be in charge of your health care, and it should be between you and your doctor.
Yes, well, I mean, don't even get me started on all this, because it's very frustrating as a physician to be told what you can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And to say, well, I'd like a little bit more data on this. And, if I'm not willing to, whole separate deal, but that whole EUA, I guess, is there for a reason. And it kind of feels like it was taken advantage of a little bit in the last couple of years. I
think exploitation of EUA is exactly what we're watching.
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right. That's a great synopsis. And thank you for doing that, because that's stuff that I don't really pay attention to as far as, when it comes to the FDA political stuff, and you're much better about staying on top of all that. And so thanks for explaining that. That is interesting.
That was fun.
It just gets you thinking. And I just get really frustrated when you start looking at the history of how some pharmaceutical agencies have been able to skirt around the FDA, have been able to hold back the FDA, withhold data, and then make a profit, and then go, okay, we'll pay this fine. We made $50 billion. We'll pay the $1 billion in fines. And
I mean, I've not made it any secret that I worked for the pharmaceutical companies long ago. And what made me not a fan of them was working for them. I mean, I don't like the process.
Oh, I thought you were for sure going to say the ass oil.
Yeah. We can retell that story anytime you want.
I don't remember what episode it was, but basically Eric told a story when he was a drug rep, and he involves discussing ass oil in a very graphic way.
You just need to search Travis Page Gut Check Project, because I don't know the number. We'd have to look that up. But it's Travis.
And if anybody's good at making memes, do a lot of Travis Page ass oil memes. I'm not good at those memes.
Oh, shoot. What you got?
All right. So hot off the press. This is an accepted manuscript to be published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology, one of our premier journals, by the godfather of Sibo, Dr. Pimentel, and his group out of Cedars-Sinai. The title of this is Methanogens, Hydrogen Sulfide Producing Bacteria Guide Distinct Gut Microbe Profiles and Irritable Bowel Syndrome Subtypes. Why is this interesting to me is because if you're unaware of what bacterial overgrowth is, or SIBO, SIBO is when you have some sort of motility change. Now, Dr. Pimentel's research has truly focused on those people who have had a gastroenteritis, or you get an infection.
Right.
You go down to, you go to a foreign country, you get sick, and then you come back and you're never right. Well, his data and what his lab is really focused on is showing that when you get sick like that, a percentage of people will develop a antibody to something called the CDTB toxin, which is a toxin that certain bacteria will actually produce, Salmonella, Shigella, Campylobacter, I believe. And then you can develop, the body makes these antibodies called antivinculin antibodies to try and get rid of this toxin. So there's antibodies being made, and the vinculin antibodies happen to have a very close affinity, meaning they fit. Think of like a lock and key, and they can fit in these, they call them electrical conduits, where one impulse goes to the other. These are called the interstitial cells of Cajal. And what it does is it actually blocks that. So think of a cell tower where every once in a while a big sock gets pulled over the cell tower, and then it's just non-functioning. So that's what his research looked at, and that's where he really started with this. And he's got a blood test that he developed called IBS Check, where you can see if you have these antibodies. And he's worked to develop this breath test called Trio Breath Smart. And what that does is that looks at 3 different gases: methane, hydrogen, and hydrogen sulfide. So this is something that we've known for a little while, thanks to him. And when I've listened to him lecture, he has always discussed how, well, we don't really care what's going on in the colon because it's the small bowel where the problem is. This particular article is a little bit different because he's taken kind of a 180 turn, and he's saying we've looked at the stool of these people that produce these gases. So it isn't, do you have SIBO? It's like, what type of SIBO do you have? And what they did is they looked at randomization. They took people that had IBS-C, and then they paired them off on methane positive and methane negative, and then they had IBSD, and it was hydrogen and hydrogen sulfide and neither, and they just looked at that, then they looked at their stool. Mm-hmm. And so this is an analysis of that. Why I find it very interesting is because for a very long time, people would show up with stool analyses, and they'd say, what do I do with this? And he has always been saying, well, we're looking at the trash necessarily. This could be dead bacteria. We look for the RNA and the DNA in this. We do PCR and all these other fancy tricks to see what's in your poop, what's going on there. There's all these companies trying to jump on board with this. And it's always been that we have the technology to check it. Do we have the technology to do anything about it? So in this particular article, he says, oh, check this out. Here's what's going on. We found a correlation. So specifically in IBS-C subjects that had positive methane breath tests, they actually had a type of, not even bacteria, it's an archaea that we've known about for a long time called Methanobrevibacter smithii. That's nothing new. But what he was surprised to find out is those that are methane positive had a distinct gut microtype. They actually did not have a necessarily narrow microbial dysbiosis, which is what he thought that they would see, right, compared to hydrogen sulfide producers. And they had it seemed to be a predominant increase in Ruminococciae and Chrysinocellaceae, which are known syntrophs. And what he means by that is when you have methane, and remember that methane, when you produce methane, it slows everything down. That's how it causes constipation, and it causes this dysmotility and just kind of feeds on itself. Well, the methane is CH4. It needs hydrogen. And what he postulated was that, these particular bacteria are donating the hydrogen to the Methanobrevibacter. So I'm going to call those syntrophs. And then he looked at hydrogen sulfide. Now, hydrogen sulfide, we know we don't particularly like hydrogen sulfide, and we discussed that in the Indole 3 episode a few episodes ago where we talked about tryptophan. Remember that one?
Yeah, that was episode 82.
At episode 82, we got a little bit into the fact that hydrogen sulfide can be produced, and that's not good because that's been linked to colon cancer and to developing ulcerative colitis. And in this case, he described that, you need to have basically these hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria called Fusobacterium and Desulfibrio. So that one is interesting because those are reducers where they can make hydrogen sulfide. And then he talked about how if you didn't have the methane positive, you typically did not have these different types of bacteria growing. I find this really interesting because the data would suggest that hydrogen Sibo is part of the whole microbiome story in IBS-D, but you have to have this methanogen. So now they're describing this as EMO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth. So you have to have the M. smithii, and now this is the first time ever that the M. smithii has these two friends that donate the hydrogen. It's really interesting because talking about this, you go, let's smoke those guys now. Let's send in an antibiotic to smoke those guys so that the methanogen, because remember, there's no antibiotic to get rid of Methanobrevibacter smithii. That's where we did all the research on Atrantil and Atrantil Pro, because that has been shown in animals to actually decrease the methane production, and it does that. But there's no pharmacologic way to get rid of it. So he did hint at it. He said, based on these studies, we're now in the process of developing some different drugs to try and help with this population. And he's trying to say that there's this clear relationship between this. So it really got to thinking, I'm like, wait a minute. When you look up these bacteria, the Ruminococciae and the Chrysinocellaceae, I'm like, these are actually bacteria that produce quite a bit of short-chain fatty acids. So I contacted Sylvia Molino, our favorite PhD in this space, and she said, send me the article. This is really interesting because we're doing the same research, and we're looking at how tannins can help with this. That's what quebracho and chestnut are. But on one of our prior podcasts, we got into the fact that in a certain environment, you will have an uptick of bacteria. So is it that those two bacteria, yes, they may be producing hydrogen that the methane uses, but they're also producing other metabolites?
That's right where my mind's going. I'm going to let you finish because I've got a question.
Well, so it's like, is this cause and effect? Like if you didn't have them, would a more malicious bacteria be able to donate the hydrogen? Are these going up because they realize that everything's getting out of skew a little bit and the body's trying really hard to keep things in check?
So that is actually another alternative, I think, which is plausible. You could obviously have bacteria that you don't want there proliferating and then simply donating the hydrogen anyway. And hydrogen, through a biological process, is oftentimes going to be free and available for brevi to use because that's just what it does. Mm-hmm. But I think that this highlights, why having the right amount of things such as hydrogen sink style polyphenols available is so important to your health. It's just yet one more way that the strike and balance comes from having an appropriate diet or supplementation, because you need short chain fatty acids. We've had episodes multiple times about SCFAs and why they're beneficial and why your body needs them. So shutting down that bacteria or killing it or removing it is probably not the answer. What you want to do is have the right things in check to stop the abundance of hydrogen where it doesn't belong.
Yes.
And so possibly having the Cabracho and Atrantil or good, colorful diet, Mediterranean-style diets, which allow those polyphenols to make their way to the colon to essentially soak up the hydrogen just like the body is designed to do, would prevent the overabundance of hydrogen being used to both produce methane as well as hydrogen sulfide where it doesn't belong.
So what Eric's talking about is exactly why we used Cabracho and chestnut. These are very large, stable tannins, which have what are called hydroxyl bonds all the way on the outside, and it works like a hydrogen sink. So as it moves around, it's like a sponge soaking up hydrogen. That's what we were looking at in the small bowel. And I actually went for the colon, like making sure you have good microbial diversity. But since it's poorly absorbed, meaning it will make it to the colon, it will continue to soak up that hydrogen.
Yeah.
So you don't want to completely starve, you don't want to just get rid of the bacteria that produce the hydrogen. You want to be able to have molecules that can soak up the hydrogen, keep it in balance, so that the Methanobrevibacter doesn't just go willy-nilly and grow everywhere and have what they call a methanogen bloom is the new term that he's doing. And this is all props to him for doing this kind of research, because he's just blazing. And admittedly, I'm reading this, you're like, oh, this is a moving target the more we learn.
Well, and another huge prop to Pimentel, because this is not his original position. This is him adapting to new data. And there are a lot of people who won't do that. And like this, if you were to have had your conversation with Mark 10 years ago, he's not talking like that.
No, he's not. He's saying we have to quit looking at poop, period. But now he's saying, oh, well, it's kind of interesting. There is that thing. Where this goes, who knows? So then you're looking at this and saying, okay, should we get rid of the Fusobacterium and the Desulfovibrio? These are just crazy names. If you have hydrogen sulfide predominant, and if you do this, we need to get rid of the Cristinella and the Ruminococciae. So I'm really curious to see what Sylvia's going to say, because she's like, oh, I have a very strong opinion on this, because this is the world she lives in, how tannins affect these bacteria. And she's done research where we've talked about where when people take these tannins, they have increase in anti-inflammatory markers like butyrate and propionate and indole-3 propionate that we talked about. So I just think it's really interesting, and I wanted to get in front of it before the Sibo community started talking about it and trying to kill all these bacteria that actually may have some benefit. Maybe what we need to do is soak up the hydrogen first.
Yeah, well, it's the difference between when you can use a pellet gun to take out the rabbit or the bazooka. I mean, because eradicating them, I don't think is the answer. I think that would be dangerous.
Everything's all about balance and checks and balances.
So when you said that those words were a little bit hard and difficult to say, it kind of reminded me of because some of these words are new. Follow me here. So we had some people who, in the first year of the pandemic, named their kiddos COVID. And how long is it going to be till we have a Methanobrevibacter enrolling in kindergarten?
Yeah. This is true. Yeah, this is I literally just printed this and found it, and I said, man, we have to talk about this. Let's go over it. Let's just at least make sure that we can get in front of this. And because in my world, once this becomes printed and doctors start looking at it, I want to make sure that I understand it before decisions are made, knee-jerk reactions. Basically what I'm saying. We don't need to knee-jerk on this. It's good information. I love it. I love the work they're doing. It made me a little nervous when he said this is going to be used in drug development.
Yeah.
Which
I don't like that part.
I don't like that part. But
he may have been, and knowing Mark, he may have been obligated to say that because it's just, unfortunately, it's where some of his funding comes from for him to do this research. And he has to leave that door open.
Yeah, and this is, he's been doing it for 28 years, this one particular thing.
Sure.
So, props, it's there. So
Definitely. So if you're ever wondering what the connection was between Rob McElhenney, Ryan Reynolds, Mark Pimentel, and the FDA, this episode should have done it.
Yeah, if you're sitting around doing that.
Because that's what everyone always talks to me about. How can we connect those four things?
It's just, I get asked that question all the time. I'm like I'll be sitting there watching Deadpool and just be like, what's his deal with methanobrevibacter, man?
Is Pimentel going to come out in the show?
So kind of a little smattering, a smorgasbord of science and political views. So, and pop culture.
Pop culture.
Yeah. Pop culture.
Yeah.
Politics and science.
Soccer teams.
And soccer teams. Yeah.
Well, please like and share. The more that you can go to iTunes and or Spotify and give us a 5-star rating. And, of course, share this with your friends, your family. And, each week the email increases. So thank y'all so much for writing in, giving us suggestions. And for Carl, who wrote in and said that you like the blue shirt that I wear often, I went ahead and put it back on. So thanks for noticing.
Nice.
It's not something that I ever keep track of. And he also mentioned that you seem to wear the same scrub top. So thank you for noticing that I get to change.
And so if you're wondering actionable items, we still stand by the original thing. Mother Nature seems to know how to do it best. So get your daily dose of polyphenols, and you can improve that with the biohack of using Atrantil Pro, which has spore-based biotics that help break down the quebracho and the chestnut so that you can experience the full benefit in your colonic microbiome. What's the word? Not flora, tropical. Think of something that's just fauna. I don't know. What are the words to describe?
I don't think it's fauna.
Well, just, I'm thinking of something lush and many different plants. That's how your microbiome should look. It should just look like this broad group, not a narrow. You just want like a couple dandelions sitting in there. You need like a full.
It should look like the Fort Worth Japanese Botanical Gardens.
There we go. Turn your microbiome into the Fort Worth Japanese Botanical Gardens with Atrantil Pro. You can go to kbmdhealth.com and start building your Japanese garden in your cold.
Thank you.
There we go. Take it easy. Episode 84.
See you later.